Good morning. My name is Emmanuel Remy, and I am fortunate enough to chair the Environment Committee for the City of Columbus on behalf of Columbus City Council. I see everybody was practicing a hand-free shake meeting, which is now the new norm. Just returned from being briefed by the CDC in the last couple of days, and so it's of paramount importance that you may even want to stop fist bumping and hitting elbows. So at this point, so we're just out of an abundance of caution, making sure that we are practicing safe meetings, and so fortunate that we're able to make it today and make sure that we have this important hearing that is with the Columbus City Council's Environment and Zoning Committees. As I mentioned, I'm Emmanuel Remy, chair of the Environment Committee, and as chair of the Zoning Committee, Councilmember Tyson had planned on co-hosting the hearing. However, she is not able to be here this morning due to a personal emergency. The purpose of this morning's hearing is to share with the public and hear public input on the proposed energy benchmarking ordinance, ordinance number 452-2020. Before getting started, I want to make everyone aware that this hearing is being recorded for rebroadcast on CTV, Columbus's government television channel 3. The rebroadcast schedule is available at www.columbus.gov. A code change is needed to adopt the Energy and Water Building Performance Ordinance that will require large building owners to track and report building energy and water use to the city annually. While the code change will occur in the building section of the Columbus City Code, this policy will potentially have a significant impact on the environment. As you will hear from today's presenters, the legislation we are discussing is being considered because Columbus is committed to sustainability efforts that reduce the environmental impact for greenhouse gas emissions. Many of us are new to sustainability efforts, so to put this into context for those of us who are not experts, the proposed ordinance's projected greenhouse gas reductions would be equivalent to the following: removing 93,000 passenger vehicles from the road each year, the emissions avoided by running 95 wind turbines each year, the carbon sequestered by 575,000 acres of forest each year. The team that is presenting today has worked hard in researching the concept of building energy benchmarking and transparency. They have comparison data for early adopters of benchmarking, including cities such as Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, San Francisco, and Seattle. It is important to note that the data demonstrates benchmarking can result in energy savings. In the city of Columbus, we make a conscious effort to be mindful of the impact our local community has on our environment. This city also has a strong commitment to environmental issues, especially around sustainability, climate change, and emissions reductions, which is part of what brings us all here today. Columbus is one of only 25 cities nationwide participating in the Bloomberg American Cities Climate Challenge, an opportunity we had to apply for and ultimately won. The challenge provides our city with national technical supports, assistance, and networks to deepen and accelerate our work around climate change and sustainability. We know in Columbus that climate change is real and impacts our most vulnerable residents the most, which is what drives us to act. Through the climate challenge, energy benchmarking was identified as a priority action for our community, which is what we will learn more about today from our presenters, as well as offer another platform to get feedback and input from stakeholders in the community. It is important that we do our part to encourage mindfulness, innovation, and creativity in the adoption of environmentally responsible practices in every aspect of our lives, including in the operation of larger building structures throughout our community. Benchmarking is a great tool for encouraging these practices. Columbus is committed to reducing community-wide greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption by 20% by 2020, ensuring that buildings in Columbus, which account for 58% of community-wide greenhouse gas emissions, are as energy and water efficient as possible, is a critical step in our efforts to ensure that Columbus remains a healthy and vibrant community. Benchmarking is an easy way for buildings to measure and manage their energy and water use and focuses on creating information that will enable better decision-making around building energy use. This has been, as I mentioned previously, this has been a high priority to figure out how do we contribute to the global effort to reduce our carbon emissions and to participate in the worldwide effort to be more sustainable in the city of Columbus. I am very, had the opportunity to research a lot of the other cities that have instituted benchmarking and found that the successes that they've been achieving are notable and certainly ones that we would strive to emulate. With that, we will now transition to the next portion of the hearing. This morning, we will receive presentations from Aaron Beck, the Director of Special Projects of the Mayor's Office, Jenna Topaldi, Climate Advisor, Office of Sustainability, Tony Celebrezzi, Assistant Director, Department of Building and Zoning Services. I'll go ahead and Aaron, Jenna, Tony, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Councilmember Amy. Thank you so much for holding today's hearing and for convening everyone. I really do appreciate your leadership in this space, for considering the legislation, and for creating space for us to share more about the ordinance and about energy benchmarking today. I also want to give a note of thanks and appreciation to the staff who helped make today possible. I'm going to advance to the next slide. Again, my name is Aaron Beck. I'm a Director of Special Projects in the Mayor's Office, so I'm part of our policy team, and I am our Sustainable Columbus Liaison. And so, as Councilmember Remy shared, sustainability, and especially climate change and emissions reductions, are a priority for Columbus, and especially for Mayor Ginther and for our administration. So just about a month ago at State of the City, Mayor Ginther announced and committed the City of Columbus and our community to be carbon neutral by 2050. So I really do see everything that we're discussing here today when it comes to measuring our energy use as really being foundational to helping our community meet that long-term ambitious goal. As part of the American Cities Climate Challenge work, energy benchmarking for buildings community-wide was identified early on as one of 8 priority actions that we wanted to take on and to look into. Let me go to the next one. So why are buildings important? Why are we looking at measuring energy use in our buildings? We do know that buildings account for 58% of our community-wide greenhouse gases. And we do know that poor performing buildings, based on what we've seen from other cities and what has been reported from other cities, that poor performing buildings use 4 to 8 times more energy than the best performing buildings. And so this really represents energy, money, and resources that are being wasted due to inefficient structures, systems, and or operations. So being able to measure that energy use really is a great way for us to be able to make better decisions about our buildings and how buildings are operated. And so really wanted to share what some of our goals were going into this, and when we were considering energy benchmarking, we knew that we wanted to create a structure to measure energy use and to really aid building owners in becoming aware of their energy and water usage for their property. We also knew that we wanted to provide reliable energy data so that we could really better inform decision making when it comes to buildings and building operations, especially again when it comes to energy use and energy efficiency. And then we knew we wanted to provide transparency to really help inform awareness around energy efficiency and influence behavior change. And not just that of the building owners, but really those that are working in the building or might be living in the building. So really kind of trying to increase awareness with individuals as well. So those were really the high-level goals that we knew we wanted to achieve when we were considering an energy benchmarking policy. And with that, I will hand things over to Jenna Topaldi, our climate advisor, who's here with us because of the American Cities Climate Challenge work.
Thank you, Erin. Can you all hear me? Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about what is benchmarking and transparency, what's some of the benefits that we can see and that other regions have seen by implementing these policies, and then to build on what Councilmember Remy talked about in the beginning, share some success stories from other cities and what they've seen once these policies have been implemented. I'm going to pull this. So I'm going to start with the basics. What is benchmarking? In very simple terms, benchmarking is the process of tracking and reporting energy and water use over time. We know that building owners can't manage what they don't measure, and energy benchmarking is a structure that is in place to support building owners to understand how much energy they're using, understand where inefficiencies can be spotted, and take action to change that. It is the foundation to ongoing energy management, and it's a proven best practice. We know that through US EPA data, about 30% of energy consumed in buildings is wasted, and energy benchmarking brings this data to the front of mind for building owners and allows them to spot inefficiencies and reduce those inefficiencies to ultimately save themselves and their tenants money. From a procedural standpoint, there are 2 buckets of information that you need to benchmark: monthly consumption data from your structure, and then some basic building operating characteristics. The reason that you need both of these is in order to normalize the raw consumption data that your building is using for building operations. So if a particular building is an office, that has a different energy intensity than, let's say, a hospital. And so these 2 pieces of information get put into a benchmarking tool, which I'll talk about on the next slide, and it ultimately puts out energy performance metrics. With these performance metrics, building owners can identify how their building compares to other buildings in their portfolio, other similar buildings across the country, and ultimately identify which of your buildings are high performing and that you want to showcase off, and which ones have the most opportunities for savings. The tool that is used for energy benchmarking is called the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. It is created and managed by the US EPA. It's the industry-leading tool that cities that have mandatory and voluntary benchmarking programs use, in addition to private sector big businesses who use Portfolio Manager for managing their portfolio of buildings. It's a free online website. EPA updated it a couple years ago and said that they updated it into a format that's like TurboTax, so it's sort of like click and play. It's very user-friendly. More than 500,000 buildings are already benchmarking in Portfolio Manager. When we're looking at data, we know that data quality and standardization is important, and that is why we will use this tool, because it ensures that the results that the city is receiving from energy benchmarking is consistent and reliable across all the buildings that are reporting. So the second part of a benchmarking and transparency policy is transparency. And what this simply means is that a subset of the data that gets reported through the benchmarking process gets shared with the community. So these are annual aggregated metrics for an entire building. Because energy use and energy efficiency is unseen, you can't look at a building and automatically know this building is efficient or this building isn't. Data transparency is critical to inform tenants, businesses, residents, investors of the energy efficiency of their structures. So it fills an information gap that currently exists. It also improves consumer choice. Tenants and businesses and investors, as I just mentioned, can see the energy efficiency of a building and know the environmental performance of where they choose to work and where they choose to live. It also provides an opportunity, a market incentive for improvements. So buildings that are further along on their environmental journey and have higher performance. Again, we've seen organizations showcase those buildings, and the ones that are further behind on their environmental journey have the greatest opportunities for savings. So transparency is not necessarily a new idea. We communicate through scores and labels and ratings in many different facets of the world. It's how we understand that when we get a cheeseburger, it's 500 calories. It helps us ascertain how much money we're going to spend on gas when we're fueling up our cars, if we're not driving an electric vehicle, every month. And it's how we know the efficiency of the equipment that we're putting in our homes and our buildings and the efficiency ratings. Again, this builds on that. This is not a new concept. It's something that is not applied to buildings in Columbus yet, but it will help fill in that information gap and provide more information to the market. So what are some of the benefits of energy benchmarking and transparency policies? They're quite wide. We know that building owners who consistently benchmark over time see about a 2 to 3% reduction in their energy bills consistently annually. This is just by bringing energy to the top of mind. So we know that in Columbus, there's a real appetite for energy efficiency, but there is a lot of opportunity for buildings to start going through this process. And so we can expect to see about a 2 to 3% energy use reduction annually. We know, as Councilmember Remy highlighted, that there are significant environmental benefits. 3 to 4% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per year helps clean our air, helps keep our community prosperous in the future. We know that this also helps drive economic competitiveness. So businesses, tech firms, large organizations that are looking to relocate either headquarters or large staffs of people are increasingly valuing energy. They're looking to relocate in cities that are taking climate change seriously, and this helps put Columbus on the map in that regard. And then we know that building owners who understand their energy use may take voluntary action to reduce their energy use, and that helps create local jobs, energy jobs, engineering jobs. These are local, high-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. So to bring this back to what Aaron had spoke about a couple minutes ago, what are our goals? We want to create a structure for building owners to understand their energy use. We want to give them reliable comparison data so that they can start to reduce their energy use and remove energy waste. And then we want to transition this over to the public so that the market can drive this change. We know that energy benchmarking checks all of these boxes. So this is a map of the policy landscape across the country of other cities that have similar policies in place, and 3 states as well. So there are over 33 cities that have energy benchmarking policies in place. We would be the first in Ohio, lead the way for Cleveland and Cincinnati and other smaller municipalities. Early adopters of this policy were about 10 years ago, typically on the coast, but over the last 3 to 4 years, there's been a real resurgence of energy benchmarking in the Midwest, as you can see, with policies being adopted in Des Moines, Kansas City, and St. Louis, from recognizing the important environmental, economic benefits of these types of policies being adopted. And so I'll highlight a couple of them just to share. Chicago has an energy benchmarking policy in place that applies to commercial and multifamily buildings over 50,000 square feet. In 4 years of that policy, they saw a reduction of over 5% of energy reduced across their portfolio of buildings that complied with the policy, which equated to over $15 million each year in bill savings. And they had a compliance rate of 88% with that policy. Denver has a similar policy that applies to commercial and multifamily, but the threshold is dropped to 25,000. Through very, very robust stakeholder engagement and education and outreach, they saw a 4.5% reduction in energy use in the first year of their policy, which was over $13 million in bill savings. And they have the highest compliance rate of any city across the country at 93%. And then Minneapolis similarly applies to commercial and multifamily buildings 50,000 and above. They saw 5.5% savings over 3 years, $21 million per year with an 80% compliance rate. The other important thing to note is in all 3 of these jurisdictions, their economies continued to grow, their populations continued to grow. Their implementation teams at the city level really leaned in with building owners to support them through this process, and ultimately the building owners and the business community continued to thrive, and they saw the benefits associated with these types of policies. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tony Calabrese to talk a little bit about what benchmarking and transparency in Columbus can look like.
Thank you, Jenna. Good morning. As many folks in this room know, that Columbus has a way of doing things called the Columbus Way, and we wanted to make sure that we followed that process of collaboration and working with many of the stakeholders that would be impacted by this ordinance. And so as we began the ordinance development process nearly a year ago, we sat down with worked internally to come up with a list of people that we wanted to make sure we reached out to. We held over 85 one-on-one meetings. We had a stakeholder engagement group that met in this room for over 200 hours last year, discussing, what type of criteria, what type of characteristics should this ordinance, how should this ordinance look? We didn't feel it would be right for us to put something out there. We began talking about benchmarking, but the history of it, and then the group came together and discussed pros and cons of different metrics that I'll talk about here in a little while. We also, under the stakeholder engagement, we We stood up a website that not only had the minutes from all of our meetings, but it also had a lot of data that was pulled together. And then ultimately, we had the 30-day ordinance public comment period in January that produced some very good comments that actually made us reconsider a few pieces and tried to make it better. But that stakeholder engagement process was made up of 50-plus organizations, from trade organizations to the utilities to environmental groups to the building community. And we felt it was important to make sure we had a very large cross-section of stakeholders so that we could put the best ordinance forward. So as we got into more of the details, the very first piece of this is what size buildings should be benchmarked. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of different ranges. Ultimately, the city came down on, decided we would benchmark buildings that are 50,000 square feet and larger. They would be either commercial, multifamily, and industrial on a smaller scale. But in an interest of putting our money where our mouth is, the city will be doing our buildings that are 25,000 square feet and larger. Which I believe is somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 80 buildings within the city stock that we'll be benchmarking right along with commercial, multifamily, and industrial buildings that are larger than 50,000 square feet. So it was important for the city to make sure that anything we want to put on the private community, that we are willing to take on the same type of responsibility. Now, just to give you an idea of what is 50,000 square feet, because that was one of the big questions, 50,000 square feet would be a typical LA Fitness, or even some of the smaller Krogers that people are familiar with. Some of the larger buildings that are 100,000 square feet, a good example of that is the Giant Eagle Marketplace. Those are about 100,000 square feet. That'll play into some comments here in a few minutes about our phasing in of the ordinance. So we'll end up with roughly 2,200 buildings in the city of Columbus that will be impacted by this ordinance, but that represents 60% of the building stock square footage in the city. So 60% of the square feet in the city is coming from these 2,200 plus buildings. So we felt that was a good line to draw based on feedback from the advisory group, and also taking into consideration the owners of buildings that are this size are a little bit more better resourced to handle the needs that this ordinance would require of them. So as we as both my previous speakers talked about, data transparency is kind of a key point to making benchmarking work for the public, for tenants, for building owners, and for the city as a whole. And as we begin to stand this up, once it's passed, the data that would be shared with the public is pretty basic data. Not very sensitive data. It's going to be Energy Star score, which is what would come out of the portfolio manager program that people would input their data into. Building type, whether it's office, retail, manufacturing, the building size, and the address. The ordinance specifically does not require, and we do not share, nor does the city receive any individual tenant information, nor monthly consumption. We are strictly looking at whole building annual data. Once that is, as we get into the process in about a year and a half, we will stand up a website portal that will provide that transparency to the public or to even building owners, and that will allow folks to be able to see buildings that they live in, buildings that they might rent. What is their energy consumption? How green is the building? So that type of many cities have stood up websites similar to this that receive heavy traffic, and we felt that was important for the transparency. So let's talk about what's this mean for a building owner. they're the ones that are going to be having to do a little bit of work with this ordinance. First is building and zoning tends to use the carrot when we can versus a stick. And so right out of the gate, we're not going to have any cost to building owners for submitting this data. We will have a staff person that will handle this program, but there won't be any cost to building owners other than the time invested to input that data into the portfolio manager. First year is the most intense use because you're trying to, as a building owner, you'll be trying to gather the data that is needed to feed into portfolio manager. We're estimating that's between 4 and 8 hours, depending on how well building owners have access to some of the building characteristics and use characteristics. Subsequent years, though, we've seen in the other cities, the time investment is 2 to 3 hours because we're lucky in Columbus that 2 of our larger utilities have an automated program to handle this. As I said, we will have city staff that will be providing technical assistance and guidance and education throughout the process and even before the first data is even entered. We'll be holding learning sessions for building owners and managers on how to enter this data into the system. So, all right. So as I said, we're going to have, as a department, we need to be responsible for providing resources to these building owners so that the impact on them is the least costly, the least time intensive. We will be having, as I said, a full-time staff person. We will develop step-by-step guidance in how to comply. We're very good here at BZS at putting processes in place to make things predictable and making it so that building owners or the community can assemble this information as quickly as possible. We'll do hands-on training, educational resources, and technical assistance. As I said, the key to this is going to be our staff interaction with building owners so that they know what's needed and the data they put in the first time is correct and accurate for the system. So once we get into this, the timeline for this, as you can see, we spent about 11 months with our stakeholder engagement process. In January of this year, we had our public comment period. And this month, obviously, Councilmember Ramey was kind enough to hold this public hearing and our city council is considering it. For the rest of this year, the ordinance passed. The rest of this year, we will spend our time on education and outreach to building owners with our staff person. That person will be brought on very quickly so that we have a lead time to bring building owners up to speed on what's needed and how to comply. In addition to that, the data, and the first year that data will be required, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do a two-phased approach. Buildings that are 100,000 square feet and larger, along with the city buildings, will have to provide that data by June of 2021. And that'll be the data that their building usage data for this year that we're in. And then then starting in 2022, we will drop it down to 50,000 square feet. That roughly takes that 2,000 plus buildings and cuts it in half for the first year. That allows us to make sure our processes are in place. It also helps us understand where challenges may lay for building owners as we get this process. And so at the end of, like I said, a 2-year process, we will be at the 50,000 square foot and above data required. Now, the first year, in the interest of making sure that building owners don't suffer they don't have any negative consequences, we understand there's going to be a learning curve. As with anything new, there's going to be a learning curve that we need to take into account. So the first year of data that's reported will not be installed into the portal. That way it allows our staff time to work with the building owners to come up with suggestions, ideas, maybe low-hanging fruit that they can do to make their buildings more efficient. But it also makes sure that the data that they inputted, the characteristics and so forth, are accurate and correct. Because wouldn't want somebody to be penalized if they made an honest mistake. And when I say penalized, have a score that is lower than they deserve. So the first year of the 100,000 square foot buildings, that data will be analyzed and we will utilize it. However, we will not plug that into the porthole and then the second year data, when hopefully those building owners have learned the process, they've learned the ins and outs, and we know they're accurate for what type of characteristics. That data will then be put up into a public-facing portal. So at this point, I'll wrap up our presentation. I appreciate the work that my fellow speakers have done, and Councilmember Remy, thank you again for having this hearing, and I do appreciate all the work that our advisory group, and many of them are in the room here today, spent in this room talking through things that we were proposing. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Councilmember.
Thank you very much. I just want to remind everybody that we will be accepting speaker slips. If you haven't turned them in yet, Lucy will collect them, and we will move into the speaker phase after we have some presentations from some other speakers. I do have a few questions I'd like to throw at you at this time. Do you anticipate that there will be properties that will say that they have no control over consumption? And so what would you do to, how would you address that to those particular property owners that say, hey, this is entirely tenant driven, and so I just wanted to hear what you might say about that.
I'll take it. I'll start. Sure. So about 20% of energy use in buildings is common space, which is under building owners' control. So that's one area where they can make an impact. The other thing is when you're looking at large systems in a building that impact energy use, windows and roofs and typically boiler systems are all within control of the building owner. So those are areas where we recognize that most building owners who rent space out to tenants, they cannot control the energy use that's happening in the tenant space, but some of the foundational elements in the building envelope and the roof, windows, and HVAC systems are areas that have big impacts on energy use that the building owner does have control over.
And we will, under the heading of education, we will work with the building owner to perhaps come up with messaging and discussions to help educate the tenants to understand what the impact is of their behavior, whether residential or even commercial.
Other than commercial PACE, which we have the largest commercial PACE program in the United States. Better than New York City, and of course we were supposed to have the PACE Nation conference, but it got canceled unfortunately because of the coronavirus issues. But and we'll soon have residential PACE, which is another key piece for our residents in the community. Other than those programs, though, what other financing options are available for property owners that may want to make improvements, for instance?
Yeah, as it stands right now, we can help navigate some of the waters with connecting building owners with utility programs that exist. I think when you look at some of these other cities that are a little bit further along, they have additional financing mechanisms that the city can look into undertaking, such as green banks and revolving loan funds. The data that we can receive from benchmarking and transparency can help inform what future financing options the city and the community can put in place to support the building owners. Also,
thinking about penalties and that sort of thing, I know that the ordinance points to a combined fee schedule for fees and penalties for noncompliance. Can you discuss specifically what those penalties might be, when they might be enacted, et cetera?
Sure. Building and Zoning Services operates all of our fees and any penalties under our fee schedule that we review roughly every 5 years. We just went through a review of that here about 2 years ago, and last year began some new fees. So it's going to be a number of years before we revisit that section of code at this point. Also, at this point, we don't know what the compliance rate's going to be. We don't know the challenges that building owners may encounter, and so to put in penalties at this point would be kind of making it up without having good data to back it up. And so we chose to reference that section, and we will come back. We'll go through any type of changes to this section. We will obviously have a stakeholder engagement process. As a matter of fact, a number of the advisory members asked to continue on in their capacity as a stakeholder group, and so we intend to keep that group stood up and keep them informed of what we're learning, what we're seeing, and thus, if we do down the road feel that we need to install some penalties or install a fee for compliance, then we would work through that group, and then we'd come back before you as a committee hearing.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now I'll move on to the speaker phase of this hearing. We do have a number of speakers that we've invited down to speak to this, and then of course we have our people that chose to put a slip in today. Our first speaker will be Rebecca Perry Damson, a trustee with the Columbus Apartment Association. Rebecca, oh yeah, I'm sorry, over there at the podium, I guess. Thank you.
Sorry, I have terrible eyesight. Good morning, I'm Rebecca Perry Damson, and I'm the president of Roger C. Perry and Company. We are a local property manager and owner with a portfolio of about 1,500 units, and we are non-subsidized, 100% non-subsidized, and our average rent is $700 to $800 or below. So we're one of the larger providers of affordable housing in the city without taking any money from anyone except for the people who live there. I'm here on behalf of the Columbus Apartment Association, a nonprofit trade association that represents the interests of owners managers of over 126,000 rental units in Columbus and Franklin County. I and the Apartment Association oppose the mandatory requirement for property owners to supply energy and water consumption information as it was presented to the city of Columbus. It's impractical on apartment owners, and we believe does not achieve the stated goal of encouraging better energy and water usage, and could potentially, with the administrative requirement, actually increase costs and then increase costs to residents, which would go against another big concern I know the city has, which is affordable housing. You mentioned about common area versus tenant-controlled areas and properties. The majority of my properties, other than lights that are all on motion sensors or electric eyes, we have zero public area energy consumption. Our units are, even though they're in bigger buildings, are all individual access, so there is no common area usage there. And the owner-manager, we don't have any control of energy and water consumption on behalf of the resident. We actually kind of wish that we did, but we cannot get that information from the utility companies. We would have to get it from the residents who are not always eager to provide it. We may have an instance where somebody will call and say, hey, my utility bill is too high, and we'll try and figure out what it is. And we have to have them call the utility to get the history of the utility so that we can track when something is off. And the only way we know that is when the resident calls us and lets us know. It would be easier if that information were collected by the utility and not us, because currently if the resident doesn't report it to us, we don't get it. Also, you talk about how green is the building. I think the bigger question is how green is the tenant. And I can just tell you from being in a market-driven business that if our utility costs are too high, if it costs too much for people to live there, if the windows are drafty and the roof doesn't work and it's bad compared to other similar properties, the residents will figure it out and they'll go live somewhere else. So we already have a built-in incentive to be energy efficient. The second is that, as I mentioned before, you're asking the wrong people for the data. You need to ask the utility companies and not the apartment owners, because I may have a community of 306 units and I don't get that information. The electric bills are contracted directly with the tenant. The gas bills are contracted directly with the tenant. And on about half the buildings, the water bills go directly to the tenant. We are sub-metered on the rest of them. That information we get, and it does bring down consumption. But on the other ones, we don't have any control over it. Grandma may want it 90 degrees, and Junior downstairs may open a window. And that's the kind of thing that we can't control. Finally, apartments tend to have smaller square footage and were built with equal or better energy efficiency than most single-family homes. Potential energy conservation is greater there than in apartments, and the ordinance as it stands right now does not include single-family houses, even though they consume more energy and water than apartments. We urge removing a mandatory reporting requirement for apartments. Thank you for the opportunity to appear today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Perry Deems. I just wanted to throw it to this team and ask if you have any comments or would like to ask any questions.
So a couple follow-on points. We understand that energy use in the single-family sector is critical to address as well. Typically, those are not addressed through a benchmarking policy, primarily because single-family energy use is not tracked through portfolio manager. So the foundation of an energy benchmarking policy that applies to large buildings is portfolio manager. In addition, there are utility programs that offer free or low-cost energy audits targeted for single-family homes. As it relates to the data access, we hear your concerns around requesting that information from the tenants. That is not the structure that is typically put in place and not the structure that we would put in place here. The building owners of these properties, similar for commercial, would contact the utilities for aggregated information for the entire structure. So the utility company would be responsible for aggregating the individual tenants' data information and providing the building owners with a single monthly metric for the entire structure.
Utilities have agreed to do that?
So so this sheet shows that this is pulled from Energy Star Portfolio Manager that shows the utilities across the country that provide this data. AEP Ohio and Columbia Gas, as you can see, are on this list. They were part of our advisory group and have been working very closely with us through this process. The process is set up on the back end for them for commercial, and our understanding and in our communications with them is they are identifying the appropriate processes on the back end for them to streamline this for multifamily. If you request that information from them now, they can provide it to you, is our understanding. They have to complete it manually, and so over the course of the next year, they're working to automate their systems so that it's a seamless process for all building owners.
We've actually asked after doing window and roof replacements and things like that because we were curious and we have never gotten the information.
They have been a good
Just
partner with
FYI.
us and we are continuing and committed to working with them and have been having regular meetings with them above and beyond the advisory group sessions to ensure that these practices are put in place by the time compliance comes around.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your speaking today. Our next speaker is Trish Demeter. I was going to say it right. Demeter from the Ohio Environmental Council would like to ask you up. And I'd like to recognize Council President Harden and thank him for stopping by today for this important meeting. So thanks. I know. I was trying to get it right. I was talking with Heather this morning.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy, and the committee, and also city staff. Thank you for having me here. I am Trish Demeter. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund. We're a organization, our sister organization, the Ohio Environmental Council, is celebrating its 51st year this year. Our mission is to secure healthy air, land, and water for all who call Ohio home. Part of our mission is to protect and enhance the environment and also the health of Ohioans. We have a very robust energy program and climate action program within our organization that seeks to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the electric, transportation, and energy sector, generally speaking. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you in support of this ordinance on energy and water benchmarking. Columbus residents are already feeling the impacts of global climate change today in the form of heat waves, frequent rain events, heavy rain events, and increasingly volatile severe weather throughout the year. There's a great, I'm proud to say I've been a Columbus resident for 20 years now, so I call it my home. And I couldn't be more proud of the city's leadership on this issue of climate action. Additionally, you have one of the world-renowned research centers at Ohio State, the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center, has partnered with the city, as I understand it, for the past 5 years to produce data on what the climate impacts are right here in Columbus to our residents and our neighbors. And by 2050, Columbus could see, according to their research, an additional 3 to 7 weeks per year of temperatures exceeding 90 degrees, and an additional 1 to 2 weeks of temperatures exceeding 95. I love the heat. That sounds kind of nice to me, but it has really terrible impacts on several sectors of our neighborhoods and our population, especially older Ohioan or older Columbus residents and younger Columbus residents as well. Heat waves, as you know, each year when they happen, lower income residents who don't have access to central cooling or aren't living in an area where they have central cooling can be very, very detrimental to their health and well-being. So action in air quality does deteriorate with warmer temperatures. So those folks living in our neighborhoods, our friends and family that have respiratory problems or respiratory illnesses or chronic conditions are further impacted by climate change, and that will only increase over the next couple of decades. So action on climate change is really critical. Under Mayor Ginther, he's committed to fighting climate change on a number of fronts, and we're really happy that that is moving forward on multiple fronts, especially the recent announcement to reduce citywide carbon emissions to be net neutral by 2050, and also to move forward with a plan this year to aggregate the city's electric usage to go 100% renewable by 2022. We also commend the city staff for working really hard on this ordinance. It seems like a lot of the details have been worked out ahead of time and that you have a good system in place, so we really are just hats off to you for thinking of a lot of the details ahead of time. And we know it'll be, implementation does take time, but essentially you've got a good team and have thought of good timelines, I think, that would be ensuring that folks can come along and get that education, but also ensure that that implementation can happen. We also commend City Council for their leadership on climate action, especially Councilman Remy. When you've done work on the Environment Committee, we appreciate your attention to air quality, especially in Columbus, and City Council in general, just acting on climate, especially at the local level in the face of a void at the state and federal level is really critically important. And we have a lot of work to do, and we have to act together. Benchmarking is important because it's hard to control what you don't measure. So it's an easy way for buildings to measure and manage their energy and water use. The resulting data focuses on creating information that will enable better decision making, so that we can focus strategically to meet energy efficiency and climate change goals, and to target energy efficiency rebate programs and financing options that are out there to the buildings that are going to get the biggest bang for the buck. The square footage requirements in this ordinance, we feel, are very reasonable. Benchmarking at all non-city buildings over 50,000 square feet, 30% of which are multifamily dwellings, and all city-owned buildings over 25,000 square feet have economic, environmental, public health, public transparency, and socioeconomic benefits. The EPA indicates that on average, buildings that are benchmarked consistently use 2.4% less energy than those that are not. This reduces the demand for new and existing energy production, which reduces greenhouse gas emissions statewide. In Columbus, 20.8% of Columbus residents live below the poverty line. These residents spend up to 11% of their income on utility bills. So finding ways to be more energy efficient through benchmarking and identifying those areas that have some low-hanging fruit that they can take care of will help reduce the energy burden on these households. So passing this ordinance is an important and much-needed step in helping Columbus reduce its carbon footprint, lower costs for businesses and households, and to fight climate change. Appreciate you holding the public hearing today and inviting us to testify. And we urge passage of this ordinance by City Council.
Thank you very much. As always, we appreciate your partnership. Does the team have any questions for Ms. Demeter? I did it wrong again. Didn't matter. I'll get it right. We will work on this. Thank you
Okay.
so much for your testimony today. Appreciate it.
you.
Our next speaker is Mike Shelton, the Associate Director from the Ohio State University Sustainability Institute. Mr. Shelton, appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. We appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony today. As you probably all are aware, Ohio State is a large building owner and operator within the city of Columbus. So we, again, appreciate the opportunity to speak at the hearing today. I'd like to start by applauding Mayor Andrew Ginther and City Council for your efforts to build a more sustainable city. Resource stewardship is an important component to the city's long-term resiliency and attractiveness to future businesses and residents. In fact, Mayor Ginther's recent carbon neutrality commitment mirrors Ohio State's own existing commitment to carbon neutrality, and we look forward to working with the city over time where those commitments overlap. As a first step in that regard, Ohio State was honored to serve on the Benchmarking Ordinance Advisory Group, which was referenced earlier, to lend our perspective with managing building energy and water use data. Across the university's building portfolio, Ohio State has found that increasing our knowledge of how buildings utilize energy and water has enabled us to further advance our carbon neutrality and energy and water efficiency goals, particularly as building energy use accounts for about 3/4 of our total carbon emission footprint. In partnership with the university's long-term energy management concessionaire, the university is already planning to roll out an energy use dashboard for the public and campus community to visualize and interact with building energy use data. This building-level dashboard data will help inform where infrastructure or maintenance investments are most needed to advance and retain energy efficiency gains. Further, the dashboard can be a powerful educational tool to help demonstrate to building users the importance of individual behavior impacts. By making the energy use data visible, we hope to increase the campus community's energy use literacy and drive meaningful, cost-effective infrastructure and behavioral improvements. Similar to our existing effort in this regard, the proposed legislation would increase the level of understanding of how energy and water is used throughout the Columbus community. Ohio State looks forward to sharing our relevant building data to support this effort and working collaboratively with the city towards new solutions that might arise from this increased level of knowledge, whether through operational opportunities or new research and in-depth study that our faculty and students can generate. Thank you for the opportunity to provide support for the measure today this morning, and I'm happy to try and answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shelton. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Shelton?
I do have one question. Does your energy or your building energy program also benchmark your residential dorms?
It's all buildings on the Columbus campus, which would include the dorms.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate your partnership. Next, we have Alex Slaymaker, Manager of Smart Mobility Adoption Partnership and the Smart Columbus, from Smart Columbus, excuse me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Our community is thriving. We're creating jobs and attracting new talent. As a region, we expect to welcome 1 million additional residents to our community by 2050. However, historic growth is not actually guaranteed. We have to earn this growth. And if growth isn't managed in new ways, it will tax our infrastructure and increase regional pollution, threatening long-term competitiveness and public health. The City of Columbus Benchmarking Initiative is a critical policy to support data-driven smart growth that increases prosperity. The Benchmarking Initiative will improve building owner access to energy and water use information. With this data, building owners may choose to invest in energy efficiency upgrades or water upgrades, leading to savings on future utility bills and supporting local jobs, which you heard about earlier from Jenna and the team. There is a strong business case for energy and water use upgrades. On average, every $1 invested in energy efficiency will avoid over $2 on future energy costs. This is a very good return on investment. Many companies we work with through the Columbus Partnership and Smart Columbus in Central Ohio are already embracing energy efficiency and sustainable practices. As more properties realize the business case and choose to use data to improve efficiency, real estate competitiveness will receive a strong boost. According to industry expert IMT, energy efficient properties have occupancy levels up to 10% higher, rental premiums over 10% higher, and sales prices up to 25% higher than less efficient properties. Also, benchmarking initiatives are a requirement for any community serious about reducing emissions and being a leader on climate action. In Columbus, building emissions make up 58% of the city's total emissions, which you heard about earlier. So we cannot reach Mayor Ginther's goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2050 without advancing high-impact policies like the benchmarking initiative. Climate leadership will promote Columbus's position as a sustainable community to attract new businesses and investment. Benchmarking and transparency policies have already been implemented in 33 U.S. cities, including St. Louis and Kansas City, and some of the others that you saw on the screen that Jenna showed. And we do not want to fall behind these cities. We like to be ahead of things, and we like to be the leader. As we've seen with other communities implementing similar policies, the City of Columbus will be there as a free resource and partner to help businesses meet the requirements of the policy and pursue optional efficiency enhancements if they decide to. By improving efficiency in large buildings, Columbus will bolster public health, strengthen the economy, and advance collective prosperity. For these reasons, Smart Columbus is in support of passing the proposed ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Slaymaker. Any questions or comments?
For me, can you talk about if and how Columbus Partnership and Accelerator partners are seeing the value of energy efficiency and looking to prioritize that in their futures?
Definitely. So through Smart Columbus, we work with a lot of large employers and influential employers in Central Ohio, and they're leaning into this opportunity, and a lot of our partners have already seen a lot of financial gains, as well as kind of CSR and ESG reporting benefits as well that help with investments and building that support from customers in the community too. Yep.
Thank you very much, Ms. Slaymaker. We appreciate it. Now we'll move into the public testimony portion of the hearing this morning. We have a number of speakers today, so I'm going to limit it to 3 minutes. We will be keeping time on that. So please, when you come to the podium, please state your name, address, any organization you may have or represent. Our first speaker is John Lazar.
Good morning. My name is John Lazar. Thanks for having me here. My address is 1190 Willard Avenue, Columbus, 43212. I'll start by saying I prepared these remarks during a 20-hour hospital shift that I'm just coming straight from, so I'm shooting for intelligible here. But as a father-to-be with a baby coming any day now, my first baby coming any day, I have an enormous, very selfish interest in the planet and this community that I'm bringing my kiddo into. But being selfish is okay. Cities are uniquely situated as contributors to emissions, but also as sources of solutions. Overall, cities' emissions are high, and they have robust energy needs. With poor air quality, in cities comes more hospital visits, medical spending, and decreased community health. I see this on the front lines in the emergency department with pediatric asthma on a regular basis. However, cities are also uniquely positioned to help improve pollution, climate change, and the environment. Square footage is often utilized more efficiently to bring per capita energy use and emission levels to lower than surrounding communities. Compared with state or federal governments, cities have mayors and council members who tend to be more in touch with constituents, so thank you very much for that. Cities are more nimble and less encumbered with red tape than federal governments or state governments. Cities can lead when federal governments do not. For instance, when America stepped away from the Kyoto Protocol, cities stepped up. Cities have mass transit, green spaces, bike lanes, recreational areas, and importantly, things that make cities more attractive to businesses, greener, cleaner, and healthier are also economically productive and tend to reduce emissions. We're no longer in a kind of either-or predicament. We're doing good for polar bears and sea level is bad for bottom lines. Agendas and interests, as we've kind of discussed today, are a lot more aligned these days, thankfully. Benchmarking is good for all these things. It reduces emissions, thereby reducing energy costs, producing durable, kind of long-lasting savings. Businesses and startups are starting to demand cities that are pro-efficiency in energy. It's in their best interest so we can attract more talent. And as we gain more businesses through such policies, we can drive more demand or more jobs, with renewable energy industries engineering, and contracting. So benchmarking kind of taps into what behavioral economics or economists call nudges, whereby we kind of make systems that encourage certain behaviors. Electricity companies do this. When I get my AEP bill, it shows how my home is related to other similar homes. They've gotten individuals to use less electricity. My father-in-law loves beating his friends in daily steps through his Fitbit that he has linked with his friends. And through this benchmarking, we can provide a similar kind of nudge towards positive change while also illuminating areas where businesses or buildings can become more efficient. So let's decide to make Columbus a leader. Let's do this for our economy, our health, and our bottom lines. And I guess that's 3 minutes.
First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Any questions for Dr. Lazar?
Your comments?
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Melchi. John, a reminder that you have 3 minutes. State any organization you represent, and welcome to this hearing.
Councilman Remy, thank you. I'm John Melchi, Executive Director of the BIA of Central Ohio. Our office is located in the Crosswoods area of our city at 445 Hutchinson Avenue, Suite 280. The BIA appreciated the opportunity to be a participant in the city's advisory group that provided input to staff in the development of this ordinance. Our comments today were shared through the advisory committee process and are focused on one element: the ability of utility providers to automate the required information that is to be reported on a monthly basis once the ordinance is implemented. One of the pillars of the One of the pillars of the proposed regulations is that the administrative costs of ongoing reporting requirements are manageable for building owners. The minimal cost is based on the premise that required monthly utility information can be automatically loaded and reported by utility providers via systems like Energy Star's Portfolio Manager. However, it is our understanding that at this point in time, this system is not yet fully in place. Based on information at the advisory committee meetings, both private and public utility providers have work to do to reach the level of automation and vision. The ordinance provides considerable lead time prior to implementation, with the intent that there is ample time to achieve the automated systems that will be required. However, the fact remains that for this ordinance to work as is being suggested, both private utility companies and the City of Columbus Department of Public Utilities have work to do. And building owners who face compliance requirements have no control over the work of AEP, Columbia Gas, or the city's Department of Utilities. This situation was part of the discussion in the advisory committee. Implementation steps are needed for AEP NiSource customers, especially for those who receive bills from third-party energy sources, all City of Columbus water customers, all City of Columbus electric customers. The BIA asks that Council understand this current situation and be open to future changes in the implementation date should AEP, Columbia Gas, or the city's Department of Public Utilities not be able to comply in a timely manner that will allow for the required education, training, and implementation by building owners to efficiently comply with the reporting requirements of this ordinance. The BIA understands that Columbus and the Central Ohio region are competing in a world economy. We appreciate the perspective of the economic development professionals who highlighted the importance of energy-conscious policies to future employers, and we appreciate that these policies consider the costs associated with implementation to existing businesses. Thank you, and sorry for breaking the podium.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Melchi. Jenna, can you reiterate the estimated work time that's going to be involved with this, and then also can this be automated? I mean, is this something that we can, as Mr. Melchi suggested?
Yeah, absolutely. So the times that we shared on the screen that we estimated of 4 to 8 hours, that's actually to do the benchmarking process manually without the automation. Those numbers are cut in half at least for the automation process. As it stands right now for commercial customers, both utilities, AEP Ohio and Columbia Gas, have systems in place on their end of things and on the front user end to automate the monthly data process. They have several hundred buildings already using that process as it stands, and we know building owners who've gone through that process. We also know building owners on the multifamily side that have gone through and used the automated benchmarking software for the aggregated data. The difference, as it stands right now, not to get too wonky, is that the back-end systems that aggregate the data for the utilities is not automated yet for them. And so we have shared with them resources and best practices and processes from the other cities that have automated their processes in order for the front end and back end systems to be seamless. And so we started working with them at the beginning of our advisory group process when we found out that it was implemented for commercial and not for multifamily. They have, again, been great partners working with us side by side and have committed to us to have an implementation timeline that's in place with lead time for the timeline that we have currently. And we are committed to continuing to work with them. We also know that if that process is not in place, many cities have done benchmarking policies without automated benchmarking in place. We hope and plan to be able to leverage the automated systems on the IOU side. And then to further reinforce that, the city utilities, Department of Power, and Division of Water are investing in the automated benchmarking software that the two IOU utilities have in place. So all buildings that receive water from the city water and receive city power can benchmark using that same platform.
Where are we at with discussions about potentially the utilities remitting the information on behalf of the property owners?
Submitting the data directly to the city.
Correct.
So the problem with that is it doesn't allow for normalization of the data based on use characteristics. So if the city were to receive raw data, it wouldn't mean very much to the public because it's not normalized for building use. So it would actually be unfair to the building owners to report out raw consumption data.
So you're suggesting that the city could not receive what you're asking the business owner to provide? I mean, explain that difference.
Sure. So if the utilities provide data directly to the city, just raw consumption data, then that is not benchmarking because it doesn't go through portfolio manager. It doesn't normalize for building use operating characteristics. The intended system is for the utilities to provide data to the building owners through their automated benchmarking software, which then connects to portfolio manager, and those metrics get reported to the city so that the building owners have that middle point where they can interact with their data and understand how their buildings are using energy. So the first data point that goes from the utilities to the automated benchmarking system, those are the links that we are working with that is fully in place for commercial and partially in place for multifamily.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks again, Mr. Melke. Next is William Casassa.
I filled that out, not knowing I was going to be asked to speak. I didn't intend to speak.
Oh, okay.
But I filled it out.
That's fair. We will note your presence and thank you for coming today. Next is Nolan Ruschelling. Thank you. I'm going to mess him up all day. I apologize in advance.
Good morning. My name is Nolan Ruschelling. I'm with the Ohio Hospital Association. Our address is 155 East Broad Street, Columbus, Ohio 43215. I am the Energy Program Director for the Ohio Hospital Association. My job, both statewide and here in Central Ohio, is to assist hospitals in achieving their energy and environmental goals. In Central Ohio, I work with all four of our healthcare systems, Ohio Health, Mount Carmel, Nationwide Children's, and The Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center to reduce their utility bills, pursue energy efficiency and sustainability projects, and ensure affordable, reliable utility access so they can best provide their community with quality care. In Central Ohio, hospitals are among the largest energy users. They're running 24/7. They are large facilities, and they have energy-intensive equipment, and they have large building footprints. All Central Ohio hospitals currently participate in the Ohio Hospital Association's Energy Star benchmarking program, which is very similar to the proposed program here today. It allows hospitals to track their utility data in order to have a baseline to make energy decisions. Hospitals in Central Ohio have invested millions in energy projects, saving further millions in utility costs that they can then reinvest into hiring more nurses, more doctors, purchasing better equipment, and supporting their community's public health. All four Central Ohio systems have an organizational commitment from leadership on down to sustainability and energy efficiency. The Ohio Hospital Association has been involved in the Building Performance Advisory Group, providing insight and feedback to city staff based on our extensive Energy Star benchmarking program, which isn't just here in Central Ohio. It is statewide. We appreciate that process and the opportunity to provide feedback. We applaud the city's efforts to reduce the regional carbon footprint, improve air quality, and better public health. We have a number of concerns around the benchmarking, but we do support it. One thing I will mention is we want to point out that for a lot of nonprofits, like our healthcare institutions, they want to take advantage of any opportunities to get incentives for energy efficiency projects, but as we all know, the energy efficiency incentives will be going away after this year. I'd encourage the city to explore supporting our nonprofit partners and all the building owners in other incentives down the line to help them invest in energy efficiency projects. As I said, OHA supports the proposed City of Columbus building benchmarking ordinance. However, the Ohio Hospital Association would view any sort of benchmarking ordinance that might exclude multi-unit dwellings or another large portion of the building stock as a policy that would negatively impact and target, among others, our nonprofit healthcare institutions. Any policy that were to exempt a large portion of the buildings would be largely ineffective, and requiring nonprofit hospitals to publicly share their results would be harmful to our hospital's sustainability and climate goals. Just to put it simply, we think everybody should be at the table and participate. We're happy to do so.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Mr. Schilling?
Comments?
Yep, thank you. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Laura Recchi. Laura, please state your name and the organization you may represent, and you have 3 minutes.
I'm Laura Ritchie. I am with a community development organization called Root and Branch. We are at 1263 East Broad Street, Columbus, Ohio, 43205. That being said, I'm actually here to read a letter from my business partner. Who had a scheduling conflict and couldn't be here this morning. Joe Ritchie is the CEO of Praxia Partners and has been a real estate developer, owner, and property manager for over 40 years in Columbus, Ohio. His firm is currently responsible for 600 units of multifamily and senior housing in Columbus, Ohio, in Central Ohio, and these ordinances are directly relevant to his business and operations. So I wanted to be able to read this for him. Dear Columbus City Council, thank you to City Council for proposing this energy benchmarking legislation. I'm writing in support of the currently proposed ordinance. As an experienced property owner and property manager, the ordinance aligns with the standard practice of real estate property. The regular tracking and evaluation of our energy consumption and operational costs is a threshold of fiduciary and financial stewardship. This ordinance does not set a new standard for property owners. Property owners and managers routinely share data with industry associations such as the Institute for Real Estate Management, IREM. IREM aggregates and publishes the benchmarks, which then inform individual property owners of their own performance as compared to their peers, thus encouraging best practices. This ordinance simply mirrors an industry practice elevating energy efficiency as a common goal so that the information shared can advance public policy. We support the ordinance and recognize its benefit to us, the public, and the environment. It is noteworthy that the city intends to hold itself to an even higher standard than it is asking of us in the private sector, and that commitment should be commended. In many cities that use energy benchmarking, such as Des Moines, Chicago, DC, and Philadelphia, the energy benchmarking is required of spaces as small as 25,000 square feet and can include enforcement fines. Compared to these communities, the modest Columbus ordinance proposed can hardly be considered too aggressive. It is incorrect to say that the proposed ordinance burdens commerce. It simply doesn't. Beyond the environmental and policy benefits, energy benchmarking has a positive economic impact on those that participate. There is a cost to keeping inefficient equipment around. Those costs are in missed energy savings, higher and more frequent repair costs, and overall comfort of residents, employees, or customers. Paying attention to our energy usage is how responsible property owners strategically determine best uses of our capital improvements and other investments. As Ms. Slaymaker pointed out, according to the Institute for Market Transformation, energy-efficient properties earn rental premiums over 10% higher than less efficient properties, and have occupancy levels 10% higher as well. It is noteworthy that these numbers are trending upwards as energy costs increase and buildings age. Public energy benchmarking encourages market competitiveness for good stewards, in essence, creating a race to the top for Columbus. This is good public policy. It is good for Columbus residents, Columbus property owners, and the Columbus environment. Energy benchmarking may be a threat to landlords, I'm just going to finish my sentence, that do not intend to be good fiduciary stewards of their properties, but just like having a building code is not a problem for people who wish to comply with the building code, benchmarking energy is not an issue for property owners who intend to be good stewards of their assets, and changing good public policy to accommodate the lagging performers would be a mistake. As real estate professionals, my team and I are in full support of the proposed ordinance, and we encourage City Council to pass it as is. Thank you for your time. Joe Ritchie, CEO of Praxia Partners. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Are there questions? All right, awesome.
Thanks, Ms. Ritchie. You have a great afternoon. Our next speaker is Klaus Eckert. Klaus, you have, Mr. Eckert, you have 3 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Klaus Eckert. I'm with Green Columbus. As someone who dedicates his professional life to making Columbus greener and more sustainable, I appreciate the opportunity to speak out about a great way to cut back on CO2 while making the city work better. As a former energy efficiency industry insider, I hope I can make a qualified statement. I worked for one of the foremost nonprofit energy efficiency companies in this country, VEIC. In addition to market research, I also ran a program benchmarking schools and hospitals in select communities in Ohio. City Council has a great opportunity to reduce greenhouse gas emissions within Columbus city limits. Buildings represent 58% of community-wide greenhouse gas emissions in Columbus. The EPA estimates that the average commercial building wastes 30% of the energy it consumes. While volunteer benchmarking is great and 40% of buildings nationwide use Energy Star Portfolio Manager, a transparent citywide requirement achieves far greater impact. In San Francisco, transparent benchmarking achieved energy savings of 6.1% over 4 years for participating buildings. Execution is king. Compliance has to be over 80% to make a significant impact. The more automated the process, the less time and money is spent on compliance. And as a side note, if a rural Vermont energy company can do automated benchmarking, I think a multi-billion-dollar national organizations could do so as well. And I applaud the city for taking the lead with their energy organizations as well. From personal experience and accepted industry knowledge, benefits include emissions and energy reductions and better air quality. Improved building performance leads to higher worker productivity, happier tenants, lower risk to investors, and improved occupant health. This is an important and meaningful step to improve the lives of citizens and building occupants. Let's make it happen.
Anything from you guys? All right. Appreciate your comments this afternoon or this morning. Next, we have Rachel Wagner.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Rachel Wagner, 36 Auburn Avenue, Columbus, 43205. I'm here with Ready for 100 Columbus. To me, implementing this policy is a no-brainer. We are living in an age where many people are acknowledging the urgency of climate change and are looking at solutions like energy efficiency for buildings to address this. And we are also witnessing a cultural shift towards sustainability, and a lot of consumers and companies are making decisions differently because there is a real desire to have human activity be more in harmony with the environment and more ethical overall. So with energy benchmarking and transparency, there is a real opportunity to keep energy use down, and this is for about 2,000 of Columbus's largest buildings, which keeps costs down for people living and working in them and reduces emissions. So I'm someone, who really represents a large amount of people who really care about the atmosphere of our Earth and what that's going to look like in the future. And this policy is a logical step to reduce those emissions and contribute to those efforts. And also investing in energy efficient architecture and building improvements is becoming very popular. The energy efficiency sector employs more people than the fossil fuel industry, and it's something that people are recognizing as a really smart thing to do. So for the buildings that are already doing these practices, they're not going to have a lot of work to do. And for the buildings, for the building owners who aren't, they stand the chance to save a lot of money in the long run. And I see that this policy includes training and resources to connect those building owners with that information to make those improvements, and I think that's really important and awesome. So yeah, I would love to see us follow the 33 cities in the U.S. who have already implemented policies like this. I'm really happy that you three shared such wonderful presentations where you were talking about numbers and the costs that these other cities have seen through doing this stuff. So yeah, I think this is a big deal. It's going to take a lot of work, and I really recognize that and appreciate that. So I do want to just kind of cut this short because we have a lot of speakers today, which is great. But yeah, I am very proud to see that the city is setting up this program, in a similar way to other programs like the Green Spot program, where they're connecting people and businesses with the information tools that they would need to be more sustainable. So with that said, I represent Ready for 100 Columbus, the Sierra Club's clean energy campaign, and we would love to see this implemented. Thank you.
Thanks again, Ms. Wagner. Any questions or comments? Thank you very much. Our next and final speaker today is Kathy Cohen-Becker. Ms. Becker, if you could state your name and the organization you represent, and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Sure. My name's Kathy Cowan-Becker, 4275 White Spruce Lane, Grove City, Ohio. And I'm the chair of Ready for 100 Columbus and also Ready for 100 in Ohio. And that is a Sierra Club campaign asking cities to commit to 100% renewable energy. So far, 160 cities now, 11 counties, 7 states, DC, and Puerto Rico have all made this commitment. In Ohio, that includes Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Lakewood. And recently, Mayor Ginther committed to pursuing community choice aggregation for 100% renewable electricity by 2022, which would lay the foundation for a Columbus commitment. So Ready for 100 targets cities not just because we have a recalcitrant federal and state government, but because cities are where 70% of carbon emissions take place. If we had the best federal and state governments in the world, we would still be working with cities because that's where we need to reduce the carbon emissions. Columbus is the 14th largest city in the country, so our emissions are measurable and significant. Even internationally they are, and we have to do our part to bring them to zero. The climate crisis is quite simply an emergency. Our planet is on fire. And so according to the scientific reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, under business as usual scenarios, if we do nothing, we're looking at large swaths of the planet becoming unlivable at a time when human populations are at an all-time high. The collapse of agriculture and natural food systems due to droughts, fires, floods, and ocean acidification, up to 1 billion climate refugees forced to flee their homes, and the extinction of up to 1 million species. While it is too late to avoid the climate crisis altogether, scientists say that by taking decisive action now, we can prevent its worst effects. And the latest report has said we must cut carbon emissions 7.6% every year for the next 10 years. So that's extremely ambitious, and it hasn't been done before, but that doesn't mean it cannot be done. We have the technology and the policies, and with visionary leadership, it can be done. So I'm very pleased that Columbus is taking significant steps to address the climate crisis. We recently got an A grade from CDP, formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, for our steps to lower emissions. And dealing with building emissions is among the most important steps. Buildings are responsible for 58% of carbon emissions in Columbus. They're responsible for the majority of emissions in most cities. So we do support this benchmarking measure. We can't start reducing emissions until we start measuring them. And this is just a basic obligation as members of our society and to future generations. We actually wish that this benchmarking initiative were even a little bit stronger, maybe setting requirements for certain things, and definitely providing incentives for cities, or I'm sorry, for building owners to, put in the energy efficiency upgrades that they're going to need. We would like to see more of that in the future. But we do support this building benchmarking initiative as it stands, and we hope you will pass it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your testimony today. Any questions? All right. Well, I certainly hope this hearing has been helpful in providing information about energy and water benchmarking and transparency. I believe we all want what is best for our environment. However, the path forward may be unfamiliar and require changes that will take some time for us to adjust to. I believe that with this legislation, we will be moving in the right direction. The process for drafting this policy was deliberate, and there has been significant outreach. Moreover, Councilmember Tyson and I requested that the team working on this policy, meet with specific stakeholders that had contacted our offices throughout. Tony, Jenna, and Aaron were very responsive and provided us with updates of organizations they contacted. The ordinance for water and energy benchmarking was on the agenda for first reading on March 2nd, and the legislation is currently on the agenda for second reading for this coming Monday, March 16th. Before we conclude, I want to thank Tony Celebrezzi, the Assistant Director, Department of Building and Zoning Services, Jenna Topoldi, the Climate Advisor for the Office of Sustainability, Aaron Beck, Director of Special Projects for the Mayor's Office, Mike Shelton from The Ohio State University, Alex Slaymaker, Partnership in Smart Columbus, Trista Metter, getting closer, Ohio Environmental Council. I'd also like to thank our legislative research team. I see Matt Erickson, Andrew Dyer was here earlier, and Nia Walters for all their assistance throughout this process. The professionals at CTV who work hard to prepare for and broadcast these committee hearings. Of course, my team, Jeff Carter and Lucy Frank, who put in an inordinate amount of work to get ready for this today. And Councilmember Tyson's team, Nicole Harper and Carl Williams. My fellow council members and all their staff who work very hard every day for the residents of Columbus. And most of all, I want to thank the residents of this great city and all of you for coming out today to support this hearing. Thank you. That concludes this hearing.